31st, 2018. The time right now is 10:35. I'd like to start by having roll call. My name is Manuel Espinosa, present. Sharon Brank, go and say if you're present.
Present.
James O'Burke.
Present.
Tiffany Collier.
Present.
We do have a quorum. Everybody is present. Move to the next item on the agenda. Approval of the minutes from the September 26, 2017 meeting. I'll give everybody a moment to review those notes. Have you all had a chance to review the notes? I'll make a motion that we accept the minutes or the notes as written, and make a motion to waive the reading of the minutes out loud. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Motion passes. Move on to the next item of
Mr. Chairman,
business.
if you'll take a vote on that, on the passage? You got the first, and you made the motion, but the second, but.
I got you. Let's vote on that motion, see if the motion carries. All in favor, say yay.
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 All opposed? Motion
Mr.
carries.
Thank you, sir.
Next item on the minutes and the agenda would be presentation of Mr. Bill Tigan. Mr. Bill Tigan, it's been a pleasure working with you for a number of years. I recall back in my years as a rookie polygraph examiner going through polygraph school, you came in and taught our polygraph training at our training program. You did an outstanding job teaching ethics. You have been a champion of ethical behavior and letting people know how important ethics is when it comes to any profession, especially the profession of polygraph. Your career, it's a phenomenal career that you have had, starting with FBI for 25 years and then being selected by George Bush as original member of the Polygraph Advisory Board with the Texas Department of Public Safety. And since then, you have committed yourself and your time in a selfless manner to the profession of polygraph. And I can't express my gratitude enough as far as being a part of your life and you allow me to be a part of your life. So for that, I appreciate all the years of service that you have dedicated to the citizens of the state of Texas and the polygraph profession here in Texas. Does anybody else have any comments that they would like to add?
I'd just like to thank Bill. I didn't mention that he'd also been on the board of the American Polygraph Association. He's participated in a lot of professional associations, and he's given an awful lot to the polygraph profession as an industry, and his service to both his country and to the polygraph profession should be recognized for the outstanding contributions he's made. I know whenever I got on the board of the APA, I came to him and says, Bill, tell me what I should be doing. So we spent several conversations having that discussion. So I think we should recognize Bill for the contributions he's made to both the United States and the FBI and to the polygraph profession itself. So I want to thank you, Bill.
Anybody else?
I'll just add a quick comment. In addition to your professional accomplishments, I just want to thank you for your kindness. You've been very good at introducing me to the advisory committee and also just taking care of me, and I appreciate that. What I'm referring to is I had car trouble on one of my first meetings, and Bill was able to pretty much spend the afternoon with me, shuttling me around Austin, trying to get my car fixed, and it's made such an impression on me, just your kindness and compassion, and I never blinked about it, just did it because it's the right thing to do. So I appreciate your character as well.
on the same level. I haven't had a chance to work with you that much professionally, but the few times that I have been with you on the board, it's been a pleasure. You have a great sense of humor, and I love your dedication to polygraph, and I wish we still had you on the board. We're going to be missing you.
Mr. Tigan, if you will, step forward and come over to the podium next to Mr. Francis, who will be presenting the award.
Got a few words I want to say about this gentleman right here. Mr. Tigan, thank you, first of all, for all your service. On behalf of our chairman, I won't, but I don't know if you know this, Mr. Chairman and board members, but I am a poet. And so I think about images and words and what they mean, because I believe that they can make a difference. I think they matter. And so the words that come to mind about Mr. Tigan: dignity, class, tenacity, persistence. That's when he does the 15 emails to me back to back. And he's just like making his point over and over. Professionalism, a public servant, consistent, committed, a man of integrity, and a man of leadership. And I think today those characteristics are not as common as they used to be. I think you embody some of that traditional stuff that my dad speaks about, and sometimes it sounds like it's mythical. It sounds like this was like back in the Camelot days when people honored their word and when they stood firm on issues. I know that you have historically questioned, statute and how does it read that way. The thing I loved and appreciated about you is that you didn't back down. Like, this is what I believe, but you were always respectful as we went round and round on this issue. I think we still have some opportunities to make some changes there. And I won't tell the people what we're going to share and sit over and talk about, but I think we're going to figure it out. I owe you that much. I'd like to read the certificate that we have for you. The Texas Department of Licensing and Regulation, a certificate of recognition and grateful appreciation to William K. Bill Tigan for being a pioneer in the polygraph field, trained by the Federal Bureau of Investigation in the United States Army Military Police School. Mr. Tigan worked in national service as a certified polygraph examiner for almost 2 decades. For being a trailblazer, licensed in Texas in 1982. I graduated from high school in 1983, but I just thought I'd point that out. Mr. Tigan began serving the state of Texas and ultimately becoming the presiding officer of TDLR's first Polygraph Advisory Committee and leading that committee for 8 years. I want to pause on that one there. When programs come to TDLR, sometimes they are hostile takeovers and they're resisted and it doesn't go well. Your leadership made that transition happen. You being at the helm there in that moment, it was meant to be. I know for a fact that we would not have had the transition, the respect, and the engagement had you not been there. So I'm very appreciative of you being in that role. For being an innovator, that's a big word here around TDLR. We talk about innovation, we breathe it, we speak it in everything we do. And for you being an innovator throughout your 25 years of service in the FBI, his work in private practice with the Department of Defense, Department of Energy, Texas Polygraph Examiners Board, and the Polygraph Advisory Committee. Mr. Tigan has set the standard of excellence. So, man, you got some work, man. He set the standard in that chair, so just know. I know it when Bill Kuntz left the chair as executive director, I'm still trying to just get close to his shoelaces. So you got some work, and we both can work together in getting up there, right? For certified polygraph examiners nationally and statewide. Mr. Tigan's passion and vast knowledge of the polygraph industry has helped form the foundation of the practice of polygraph examination in the state of Texas. His expertise has been invaluable, and his presence on the Polygraph Advisory Committee will be missed. On behalf of the Texas Department of Licensing and Regulation, I want to thank you for your service to Texas and award the certificate to you on this, the 31st day of January 2018. Signed, Brian Francis. This is some of the stuff I want to go over.
Thank you, everybody. What a humbling experience. As long as I've been involved in Texas licensed polygraph work, be honored, and I thank you for that honor. And there were people that left before me that more deserved what I'm getting than myself. It's been a fun ride. It's been a challenging ride. For me, it's over. I have 7 grandkids, and they range from the senior here at UT to the 12-year-old at home. And my days will be full. One of the things we work on is character school. And I get 7 kids from 20 to 12 twice a year who sit in my living room and openly discuss things about their character, what they want it to be, what they think it is, and we talk about those concepts. It's all right. That's meaningful in life. And all the fun I had in polygraph and the challenges I had in polygraph don't measure up to that at all. And believe me, there were some cool days in the polygraph room. But I want to thank Brian Francis for this opportunity and this very nice award. Thank you very much.
I'd like the board members to come over. Mr. Chairman, I'm sorry, could you call a brief recess?
I call a brief recess. The time right now is, what time is it? 10:48. This meeting back to order. Moving on to agenda item D. Excuse me, agenda item E, public comments. If anybody is willing and wanting to provide public comments, please, there's some public comment forms that need to be filled out prior to coming to the podium and taking the microphone. I do have one form that has been submitted. Mr. Barry Cushman. Yes, sir. Please state your name. And
My name is Barry Cushman. I represent the American Polygraph Association. Am I on?
you are on, sir.
All right. Just to give you a little bit of background, the American Polygraph Association has been accrediting polygraph schools since its inception in 1966. We recently, I would call it, reached a rather large landmark in order to better establish credibility within the field and in order to help maintain accountability outside of our own organization. The APA became a member in ASPA, the Association for Specialized and Professional Accreditation. And in so doing, because we had to demonstrate that they met certain standards, we learned a few things about ourselves. One of those things was that we probably could do a better job in reaching and communicating some of our stakeholders. We did, or I should say our attorney, did a search of statutes and rules, rulemaking throughout a number of jurisdictions, and we realized there are a lot of people who look to the APA for guidance. So my visit here is one, just to say we want to make sure we open up those lines of communication. Secondly, Texas seems to serve as a model for many other jurisdictions. Maine has had a polygraph statute, and that's where I'm from. Maine has had a polygraph statute since 1977. We essentially, we said we amended it, but we essentially easy for me to say, took the whole 1977 statute, struck all of the language, and rewrote it. And when we did, we utilized Texas as pretty much a template. So while I don't think I'll get the chance to visit every jurisdiction everywhere on the APA's expense, since you tend to serve as a model, this was my first stop. And one of the things that we wanted to simply communicate is that we do have guidelines and standards for schools. We accredit, as I said, accreditation programs based upon really the consensus of those in the field, and in part what it is that we get from feedback from stakeholders, which to date has been somewhat limited. So knowing that you are one of the few jurisdictions that not only regulates or licenses polygraph examiners themselves, but also looks at curriculum, we wanted to just be able to say, hello, we're here, and if there's anything that we can ever do for you folks, to reach out. And from this point forward, when we do start to recommend changes in accreditation standards, and your school down here is accredited by the APA, whether you provide any feedback or input or not, which of course we'd like, we want to be able to at least make you folks aware of these changes so that we're not steering accreditation away from what it is that is working in the various jurisdictions. And I'll keep it at that so not to bore you all morning. But that is the reason for my visit here. Part is just to see how it is that you do things. It's very different from what I'm used to back at home, and I know it's very different from jurisdiction to jurisdiction. And with that, if you have questions for me, I'd be happy to answer them, if I can.
Barry, I appreciate the APA sending you here. We recognize the role that the American Polygraph Association has in professional standards for polygraph that are both evidence-based and driven by science. And certainly the curriculums that the APA inspects teaches student examiners what are those evidence-based practices. Are there anything that you've had a chance to review? And you said
I think council has some comments for us.
Mr. Chairman, I'm sorry to interject. This is Brad Bowman, General Counsel. I just wanted to remind the committee during public comment, because this is not an item that's actually on the agenda or a subject that's on the agenda for discussion, you can't really engage in a discussion with the commenter. Anyone in public comment, they can say whatever they want, whether it's on the agenda or not. It's just the committee can't really engage in a question and answer or discussion because it's not posted on the agenda. We just want to stay within our Open Meetings Act parameters there. So there may be other opportunities, maybe individually on a break to visit, or I'm sure the staff could get contact information. Or if there's anything just that you want to clarify, you could ask a clarifying question, but I just wanted to remind the committee of that.
Based on the information he provided, do you have anything that needs clarification?
Did you notice differences between the evidence-based practices that the APA has and the current statute in Texas based on your review that you discussed with us?
I did look at the Texas statute that you have, if that's what it is that you mean, in part of our review, which is still in progress, of who are our stakeholders. One, we're trying to discover who they are, and then how is it that how is it that they are in fact stakeholders? What is it that they're doing? And are there consistencies or inconsistencies from jurisdiction to jurisdiction? If you're asking if I noticed inconsistencies or differences in those, there are differences in a number of jurisdictions, specifically Texas, since this is where I am. Yes, I would say that the standards that the APA recognizes and holds its schools to teaching and it holds its examiners to in its standards of practice have evolved a bit based upon the science that is out there. When I say if there's anything we can do or if you want to look to our standards, I'd encourage that. For example, as I was reading your statute, I noticed there's one particular area as far as instrumentation goes and how it is designed. And as I said, I know Texas a little bit because we did use it as a model in Maine, and I served on a committee that had done that. But for example, you have to have an instrument that utilizes, I think yours says, cardio data, pneumograph data, and then the other part is, I'm not really clear, because it says and something else, and that something else is not really defined. But from what I saw, you need those two. Current APA standards, for example, would require cardio respiration, 2 channels, electrodermal activity, and a seat motion sensor, for example. So there certainly are differences that I observed, if that is what it was that you're at. There are others as well, which folks are interested. I could answer those or discuss them on a break, as somebody mentioned.
Thank you. That answers my question.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Has there been any other forms that have been submitted? No other public speakers? I see none. Move on to agenda item F, staff reports, licensing division.
Good morning, Chairman, board members. I'm Lisa Hodek, Licensing Manager. I did want to start out by also thanking Mr. Tejan for your service and helping the agency as well as the division for getting us started with this program. Of your expertise, you know, it helped make it a smooth transition, so thank you very much. We appreciate you. And my report basically has the last 3 fiscal years and the first quarter of this year. As you can see, our numbers, our population numbers for the examiners and trainees are fairly consistent over the years. I did want to also mention that December and January, this coming January, or this January, whatever month we're in, that's our typical high volume for renewals. So for those of you listening, of course, please get your renewals in. And that pretty much concludes my report, making it brief, so I'll be happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you very much, Lisa.
Thank you.
Moving on to agenda F2, customer service division.
Good morning, Commissioner Espinosa, board members. My name is Misty Maldonado de Leon. I'm Customer Service Manager. We are new to the agenda. I would like to give a brief overview of what we do as a division for the agency. We are the first point of contact for the agency. We've got about 50 agents that are answering phones and daily answering emails, Facebook posts, Twitter, anything coming in, we're the first point of contact, so we handle all of that coming in. As a whole, we take about, well, this last quarter, about 500,000 phone calls. So that calculates to about 2,000 a day of phone calls, about 400 emails with 50 people. So you can imagine how busy we can be. That's pretty much it. We've got some statistics that we've provided you on the polygraph contacts that we receive. It's not very many, but we do treat each one with due diligence and, you know, help them as much as we can just as well. So that's it for customer service. If y'all have any questions, be happy to answer any of that.
When you refer to, Tiffany Collier, by the way, when you refer to the Twitter and the Facebook, does that fall into the email numbers or?
No, it's separate statistics.
Okay,
yeah.
so we've not had any
It counts as a contact. We count
contact
'em as
from
contacts.
social media here on the polygraph? Because I see it broken down by calls
Right.
and emails.
We do calls and emails because it's the bulk of it.
I see.
Those are so sporadic, it would be a smaller number and may not be any within a month, but we'd be happy to add it to the monthly or every advisory board if you'd like to see that.
I was just curious.
Okay.
Thank you.
What is the most common question that y'all have to answer during customer service calls for polygraph? Do y'all track that by any chance?
We don't have a way to track that, but as a manager that receives most of the escalated issues, it's going to be mostly renewals, like renewal fees or, you know, any changes. There haven't been any, so, yeah, but it's just the basic renewal information. That's the heaviest traffic. Any questions?
No more questions. Thank you, Ms. De Leon.
Thank you.
Moving to agenda F3, Enforcement Division.
Good morning, Chairman Espinoza, fellow board members. And first, like others, I'd like to thank our former chair. I wish I actually had started working with this program a little earlier because I used to be a criminal prosecutor and I would love to hear some of the stories that followed from your FBI experience. I will do that. I did not even know, so that's a new, very important piece of information I have learned. My name's Kimberly Davenport, and I'm here to bring you the enforcement report and also talk to you a little bit about what the Enforcement Division does for the department, as well as talk about the enforcement plan and penalty matrix for your specific program. Now, I first want to talk just a little bit about the statistics that we have for you, and I know that you have the sheet in front of you, but I just wanted to point out a few things about that. As you can see, since 2009 in September, 44 cases have been opened, and the majority of those have been closed. Currently, there are 2 cases that are open right now with prosecutors, and there are 2 cases opened as complaints that are being looked at right now by our intake division. In comparison to other programs that our department regulates, your programs are relatively small, but it's very important subject matter, so it's very significant as well. There are few complaints filed in your division or in your actual program, but that's also a nice indication that your licensees are generally compliant. For the fiscal year of 2018 through November, 1 case in this program has been resolved. For the department as a whole, it's been about 2,329 complaints. There have not been any agreed orders in this particular program through this fiscal year. There's been approximately 356 for the whole department. The department as a whole has assessed about $660,000 in penalties. We have collected about half of that. And when you look back at fiscal year 2017, especially in terms of penalties, that seems to be the trend. We assessed a bit over $5 million in penalties. We've collected less than half of that. But that seems just to be a trend that we can see over the past few years. And if you look at last year, there were 8 cases opened in this particular program, over 12,000 cases for the department as a whole. There were 9 cases resolved, as opposed to over 12,000 for the department. So as you can see, while there's not that many complaints in this department, like I said, I think it's a more significant one in terms of what you do, and as we were speaking about before, in terms of the ethical standards. Does anyone have any questions about statistics right now? Okay.
Sharon Brank, when you talk about number of cases resolved, what does that encompass when you say resolution?
There's different resolutions, and I'm going to talk about this a little bit later, but in terms of all the cases, let's talk about not just for the year, but in totality. There were 2 warning letters issued, which means there was a violation, but maybe it was a situation where we could educate someone, and it wasn't so severe that you just wanted to slap a penalty on them because maybe they were new to the program, or maybe it just wasn't something that we look at as the most serious. So that was what occurred in some of those cases. Some of the cases are, and I'll talk about this a little later, but are license granting cases. You know, when you apply for a license with us, go through a criminal background check sometimes. You say, you know, I was convicted of stealing. And it depends on what the license is in terms of how much that matters. In terms of a barber, if you have a drug conviction, that's a very big deal because we see that in that field. So we've adjusted what we look at. So some of the cases that have been resolved in that may be those type of cases where either a license was granted or maybe it was denied. But that encompasses that too. I would say the majority of the cases were closed for insufficient evidence. And that's just because it just didn't meet the standard. We didn't have enough to say, yes, you clearly violated the rules, and we're willing to take this forward. Does that answer your question? All right. Is there any more questions about statistics? If not, I'll move on to just the overview of what enforcement just generally does. And I know you have some of the information in front of you, so I'll try not to be too long and belabor the points. But what our division in enforcement does is we investigate and we try to resolve the complaints filed with our department. One of our key goals that we strive to achieve is consistency. We have 3 different sections within enforcement. We have an intake section. The intake section, they get the initial complaints. They try to gather all the information that they can initially. They may do a little research. They may look at it and say, well, we don't have jurisdiction over this complaint. For example, in cosmetology, if someone says, well, I got a really bad haircut from so-and-so, that's not really something that we regulate. We regulate, are they licensed? Are they trained properly? You know, do they clean up their salon? But some things aren't just in our wheelhouse, and that's not our function to regulate. It's not in the law or in the regulations. So they do all that if there's enough to proceed. And I will say a lot of cases may get closed there because a lot of times people don't respond to our request for information. So they may shut down right there. If there's enough to proceed, it gets sent to the investigation division. And the investigators, they'll obtain documents, they'll gather witness statements, they'll gather whatever evidence they can to try to determine whether a violation has occurred. They'll talk to the complaining witness, if there is one in the case. Sometimes complaints are filed anonymously. They'll talk to the respondent, and they'll talk to any other witnesses that may have been brought forth in the case. And they will generate a report, and at that point, the case usually will go on to the prosecutors. And at that point in the prosecution section, we'll review the evidence, and we'll review all the statements, the documents we've given. And we may reach out for more information if it's necessary to see what we think in terms of has a violation been committed. And we decide what should be the outcome of this. And we have different options when it comes to outcomes. We may look at it and say, you know, there's just not enough here, and we'll dismiss the case, and we'll send a letter saying, you know, we didn't find enough evidence, and we'll generally, if there is a complainant who is being named, we'll send them a copy of that so that they understand that this is what the finding of the department was. We may, like I said before, we may decide that a warning letter is appropriate. You know, our job and our goal is compliance. We want people to comply with the law and the regulations. So sometimes a warning letter is sufficient for that. Sometimes the violation isn't of a nature that we think that a $2,000 penalty is proper to deter the action. So that may be the outcome of a case as well. Another possibility that we have is the notice of alleged violation, and basically that's our charging document that says you violated this law or this rule set forth by the Texas Occupations Code or the Texas Administrative Code. And we've decided that we are going to go forth on a violation. And we have a process that we go through involving notice and giving them some time to respond. And we tell them, you know, these are the facts that we have found, just basically a synopsis. We don't lay out a hugely detailed statement, but giving them the facts, and then we tell them the law or the rule that has been violated. And we have pick a penalty based on our penalty matrix that we think is appropriate. Now, they have options to contact us, and they can contact us and discuss a settlement. They may say, you know, I actually did do this, so I'm willing to settle this, and we work it out. They may request a formal hearing, and if they request a formal hearing, that'll go in front of the State Office of Administrative Hearings. They will make a decision, and then the case actually, once the decision is made, will go in front of TDLR's commission to hear it and to determine what they think should happen. Also, in cases, sometimes additional evidence may be submitted to say, hey, would you reconsider all of this? And it at least gives the prosecutor a chance to review it and see if maybe there was some sort of misunderstanding, or maybe there's more information and we just didn't receive it. But those are generally the way that we deal with our cases. If we don't ever get a request for a hearing, or if no one calls us to offer to settle the case, and basically we hear nothing, we proceed for a default judgment at that time. When we've settled the case, what we do is we pursue what's called an agreed order. And I know that we mentioned those before, but those are basically just a settlement agreement where I say, you know, you violated this, you pay this. They say, I agree to that. They sign it. We send it to our executive director to sign, and that's when it becomes basically final. After they have a hearing, if that's what happens, in front of the State Office of Administrative Hearings, and then the commission will issue a final order stating what the ultimate findings were. And then a default order is very similar, but of course it's gone to our executive director usually with very little contact from the respondent, if any. And I will say we try to get contact, and we go through different things attempting to get their contact, because we don't want someone to say, well, I didn't get that notice, and so why are you giving me a $2,000 penalty and I never heard from you? So we go through a pretty specific process to make sure that we try to afford them all opportunities to try to resolve the case. Now, our specific division's made up of legal assistants, investigators, and prosecutors, attorneys. We get complaints different ways. Sometimes they're from, and I would say in your program, more likely from people who are taking the polygraph examinations. Other industry members in other programs and in programs can file complaints. Once in a while, you see government officials, different law enforcement officers making complaints regarding some sort of allegations that they see that are improper, that may be in violation of the rules. In some programs, I don't think it's very specific to your program, but we have a field operations division that does on-site inspections, and they generate cases based on things that they see, usually actual businesses that they go to, and they look for records and they look for signs and different things. And sometimes cases come about from our department investigators from something that they've discovered. Sometimes maybe reviewing another case, they may see something else and they may open a case. The other area cases come from, and that's something I kind of touched on before, is through licensing. Of course, we have specific parameters for each license in terms of certain things that could disqualify an applicant from holding a license. And they differ from each program, and we have set that up because every program is a little bit different and may require a little different background checks. If you have a DWI, we may not want you driving a tow truck, but a DWI may not be as important for a hearing instrument fitter, which is another program so we try to make those as specific to the program as we can by looking at the needs of each program and deciding what's appropriate. We use 3 different tools in trying to strive for our consistency in the enforcement division and in investigating and resolving complaints. And one of those, of course, is the enforcement plan that I will discuss with you in just a few minutes. And that just provides a framework for our prosecutors to work into to decide what proper penalties and sanctions may be appropriate depending on the case circumstances. We also have an internal kind of how-to document that is our complaint resolution procedures manual that we use internally to just go through the format and kind of answer questions, just basically outlining how we do things as a department inside our division. And then we also have the criminal conviction guidelines, which I've kind of discussed before, where you have specific things that may say, no, you really can't hold this license, or we're going to look at this and see if that was 25 years ago, that may change our minds. And those type cases, actually, we have special prosecutors that review those cases and handle those specifically, and that's their job to review those types of convictions and look at those cases. That's their specialty area. I'd like to move on to the enforcement plan, but I'm welcome to any questions if you have any about just the department and the enforcement division specifically.
No questions.
Am
You
I
can move on.
overloading you? Now, regarding the enforcement plan, the plan details, like we've said, the ranges for violations and sanctions available in each of the programs. And these lists aren't all inclusive. And what I'm saying is we try to cover every single thing, but there may be something that has popped up. It doesn't mean that we can't enforce something like that, and it may be something, you know, at a later date that you put on the plan, but the law changes, the rules change sometimes, and so we adapt with that. Now, the enforcement plan is generally developed initially by a work group working with the department, and that's approved by them. So that's what's come about, and that's why we have it here now. And there's many factors that are considered deciding in our cases, but also when deciding in the enforcement plan. And here's some of the factors: is how serious or severe is the violation that you're looking at? Was it intentional, or was it just merely a mistake or just an odd circumstance that just happened? Was the party acting in good faith to avoid this violation and just couldn't avoid it? Or did they do anything to correct it later? Does the party have a history or pattern for these type of violations? What penalty or sanction would effectively deter future violations of this kind? And kind of a catch-all, what does justice require? Because sometimes none of it fits in a little box, and so you kind of have to look at the overall big picture. That's what we try to keep in mind. Now, particularly in your program, we have 5 classes, and we have A through E, A being the least severe and E clearly being the most severe. And you can tell by the amount of the penalties as they go up. All the classes come with a financial administrative penalty assessed, and at times, depending on the nature of the violation and the class, sometimes either a suspension or a revocation of the license can be assessed as well. And it may be in addition to a penalty, and it may be instead of a penalty, just depending on the nature of what has occurred. And I'm just going to go over a few things. Class A, the typical penalty ranges anywhere from $100 to $2,000. And these are mostly administrative violations, failing to notify the department of the changes that you're required as a licensee to keep them up with, or small issues when administering an exam. Those are just some examples. In Class B, we're looking at a typical penalty range from $500 up to $2,500. These are when you administer an exam but your license has been expired, or trainee violations, or some sort of improper disclosure of information. Those have all been categorized as Class Bs. Class Cs range from about $1,000 to $5,000. This is unlicensed activity when someone's conducting or administering an exam without a license, not having the proper insurance, not cooperating with the department in terms of when we're asking for information or documentation, because part of the rules require record keeping, and so we reach out and say, we need these records, and if they don't have them, that's a violation. Class D, the range is from $2,000 to $5,000. This includes a few of your more egregious violations, and that's, for example, making willful misrepresentations to try to get more business, or demonstrating unworthiness or incompetency in actually administering exams. And of course, Class E is the most serious, and these penalty ranges from $3,000 to $5,000. Some of these, and there's just a few under this, but some of these are failing to abide by an order by the commission or by the director of our department, or obtaining a license by false representation or misrepresentations. So that's just kind of a summary of the enforcement plan. I know you have it in front of you, but I just kind of wanted to touch on a few things.
I have 2 questions.
Go for it.
The first under Class C represented oneself as a polygraph examiner without holding a license. Even the people who know that I run polygraphs probably don't call it polygraph. So how do you define the elements of that representing oneself as a polygraph examiner? Is it anybody who purports to detect deception, or is it someone who operates a polygraph instrument?
I have not personally worked these cases. My understanding is when it comes to how it's been defined, and I see Mr. Foster coming up here to
Step
my
up here.
to my assistance.
I'm Ron Foster. I'm the senior prosecutor, and I do work these cases. Okay? And so first off, we don't get a lot of unlicensed activity cases, and that's not seeing those type of complaints come in, because what we normally see are people that were given an exam. Most of the time they're on probation and they're being examined and they don't like somebody that did it. But back to your question, sir, what I would do is I'd look at what the definition of an instrument is, and based upon what the department's interpretation of what an instrument is, I would say the person would have to be using a polygraph instrument as defined by the statute in order to get a violation for being unlicensed and doing that if they were doing so without a license. So if they're using something that is not an instrument, then that's outside of our jurisdiction. And that's how I would probably treat that when that came to me.
I guess that would be my next question, is
Right.
the way that Texas currently defines an instrument is inconsistent with what current manufacturers produce as a polygraph instrument.
And that's not for me to decide as the prosecutor.
Okay.
That's actually more of a policy interpretation of the statute. And, we've been trying, as I understand, the interpretation of what an instrument is has been pretty consistent for a long time. And if there were to be any deviation from that, that would have to be a change in the statute, most likely, to make that more clear. As a prosecutor, I enforce the law and the rules as they currently are, not as I would like them to be or as I think they should be. I have to look at what they are right now and be as consistent with that interpretation as is just humanly possible over time, taking into consideration that different prosecutors are looking at the cases, over a 9-year period. I've been with the department for 9 years, so different prosecutors have handled this program. So that's how I specifically would look at that case.
Okay, that's great. The second question I have pertains to advertising.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things that we recognize in polygraph is that no test is 100% accurate. We recognize a p-value and range of accuracies, and we encourage our examiners to be familiar with that. Does things like advertising my tests are 100% accurate? Is that false advertising? I'm trying to figure out how you define false advertising.
So sir, I'm not going to go down that road.
Okay.
Because
I just didn't know how you define
I would
false
look at the very
advertising.
specific facts, because my job is to look at the very specific facts of the advertising, not to make general conclusions. I would look at what the person advertised, what they promised, what any contracts they said in there, and how that might have been a misrepresentation or inaccurate. I would not just make a general conclusion about that. So I would need to know the very specific facts on that advertisement in order to reach that conclusion and know what the person was understanding it to mean.
Have y'all ever pursued a case like
I
that?
have not. I have not had any, not that I can recollect. I cannot recall a complaint where someone said didn't get what I thought I was bargaining for because the person misadvertised that.
Okay. I was just trying to get
I would
some-
certainly consider it if I had good facts. I mean, if it's a part of the statute and rules that you have to advertise a certain way and they didn't do it. But it would be very fact-specific. And as I said, I just generally don't want to go down the road of speculating on that.
Okay. I appreciate your comments.
Okay.
How would y'all handle enforcement of ethical standards, complaints of unethical behavior, things like that? Is that in the matrix by any chance?
Yes.
Yes, it is.
Yes, it is. And that's actually one of the things that I would look closely at, because in what I would normally do when I'm looking to see if a person did the things they were supposed to do is I'm going to consult with others in the industry to give me insight, because I am an attorney. I'm not an expert polygrapher, and I don't know. I might not I can read the law and rules and understand how that applies, but there may be some things that are a matter of interpretation or discretion on the part of the polygrapher, and it's a standard that is a practice kind of in the field. And I would want to talk to someone who's an expert, which is someone who's a licensee, and that I can trust their opinion. And as a prosecutor, I would probably consult with them. That would be my best expert witness.
And I would say there are a few violations specifically in the penalty matrix regarding certain kind of questions that are inappropriate that would be a violation if they ask that. And then one of the things that I also mentioned was the unworthiness and incompetency. I think that could possibly go to ethics as well, but those are also detailed on the penalty matrix as well.
And I'll clarify one thing. I don't always have to go to an expert witness to figure something out. Like I'm looking on Class D, made a false report. That's an ethical issue in my opinion. I might be able to figure that out without having to talk to someone that this is completely false, and inconsistent. But on the other end, I might have to talk to someone about it. So just want to let you know, it's not a requirement that every time I go and consult with someone, I can look at it. A lot of times the violations are more of the administrative kind, whether we're asking for documents and we're not getting them. I don't need an expert to tell me they need to do that. I can look at the law and rules and see that they're obligated to provide those documents to us, and if they fail to do it, that would be a violation. But consulting with an expert is something that's very integral to what we need to do on some of these cases. And in fact, in that investigation process that Kim was talking about before, our investigator would very often reach out to an expert witness to talk to them if it was warranted, and maybe be in consultation with the prosecutor on that case. Did that answer your question?
Yes.
Okay.
One more question.
Sure.
Is the enforcement matrix including polygraph schools, the enforcement of, because I know TDLR licenses or will acknowledge polygraph schools within the state and will license polygraph schools. Now, does that include any type of complaints against polygraph schools?
Right, I'm looking through it real quick right now, and I'm not sure if it does have any specific complaints or allegations, violations that might relate to a school. In some of our programs, which are similar, that do have where we regulate the schools, there are. And it would be appropriate to include those in the enforcement plan. So if there's something in the statute or rules that specifically addresses how a school is supposed to conduct business or do something, it would be totally appropriate to include it in the enforcement plan. If because of our oversight, we didn't include it in there, but that violation came across my desk, I could still pursue it, as Kim mentioned before. I would just charge it in the category that I felt most appropriate.
And if you look at the Class B violations regarding trainees and your relationship with the trainee, I think some of that may be covered in terms of that, because that seems to cover a lot of different violations in terms of the actual supervision of trainees that I would think would at least relate to the schools to an extent.
I have to say, I don't recall seeing a case opened against a school, so I'm not sure that we're not licensing these schools.
Well, there may be a little bit of a difference in that we recognize curriculums instead of accrediting programs, so there's a nuance.
Okay,
there
that is
could be slightly different.
Yeah, that is different, because we directly license the schools in some programs, and that I can bring them to task for violations. Accrediting is more of sounds like something our Education Examination Division might be doing, reviewing it and either approving or disapproving if they fail to meet certain standards. That's a little bit outside of my purview. Any further questions?
I don't have any more.
I'll hand it back over to Kim.
Well, I'm actually done,
Okay,
unless
all right.
there were any further questions.
So I'm hearing it was a well-written document.
Well, it's been a while, Kim, as Kim mentioned, it's a pretty thorough document. I mean, we do our best every time to try to include all the violations that we've identified in the statute and rules. In many programs, the statute and rules change more often than you'd like. In this one, they've been pretty consistent. So what happens when they change often, we have to go back and look at the enforcement plan and change that often to keep it up to date. But when the statute and rules have been consistent and haven't changed, unless we just completely, something wasn't on our radar and we left it out, it should be pretty much covered in the enforcement plan. Now, that being said, in programs where there's a lot of activity, like you see a lot of violations, sometimes you want to revisit it just to say, you know what, this is a more serious violation and we've seen it occur a lot, we're going to move it from a B to a C or from a C to a D and vice versa. It's like, we don't think this is as serious as we thought it was 9 or 10 or whenever years ago, and now we're going to make it a B or an A. We're going to move it down. And you're always welcome to do that. And enforcement encourages all the advisory boards. We can do that. We can make a work group if that's your pleasure to do that. And we can revisit this and just have a general discussion about it. Even doing that, doesn't mean you're not obligated to change anything. If you just want to have a meeting with enforcement through a work group, we can look at it together and say, is there anything here that maybe we got a site wrong? Well, usually we can fix that without a work group. But if there's something that y'all want to move around, we're more than happy to do that, because this is the guidance that the prosecutors that are prosecuting these cases, this is what we use when we're trying to figure out, is it serious or not serious? If I do want to go forward with it, is it going to be a higher level violation or a lower level one? So it's a very, very important document, and we welcome your input on that if you want to have a work group and revisit it. But if you look at it and you think it's all fine, then there's no reason to have a work group.
Well, the document was established back in 2013.
Yes.
I think the author is here in the audience today and was presented an award.
Yeah.
Coming on the heels of the awesome job that he did back then. But I think it's always a good thing to revisit a document to ensure that everything's covered.
Absolutely.
And or see if there's any adjustments. I'll make a recommendation to post that in the next agenda items, creating a working group if I can get some volunteers, and I
Yes,
think
sir.
I'll form that in a motion here in a little bit.
Yes, sir. And the way that'll normally work is once you form that work group, we'll have some contacts in enforcement, and we'll be reaching out to you to organize those meetings. And we can do it by teleconference, or you could come to Austin if you like to, and we can meet together. But we can make it very easy to do this and get the documents out to everyone so we can do that. So look forward to having a work group meeting.
Thank you.
Okay.
Moving on to agenda item 4, Education and Examination Division.
Good morning, Chairman, members. I'm Kim Witt with the Education and Examination Division. And before we get started, I'd also like to thank Mr. Teigen for his service. Thank you. In your question, you were asking about the schools, Mr. Espinoza. We only approve the curriculum. The schools are regulated by the APA. So if anybody wants to be a school, then they would submit the curriculum to us for approval. And we use the guidelines that are in the rule, which is 88.100 of the technical requirements.
Thank you for clarifying that for me. Thank you.
Today, I'd just like to go over your statistics. In your report, you have your exam statistics for the first quarter of 2018. And then for your continuing education statistics, that would be also for the first quarter of this fiscal year. I'd like to point out it accidentally says 2015, but it's 18 on this continuing education. And that's, if you have any questions, I'd be glad to.
Sharon Brink, what was the clarification you just made on date?
For continuing education, the first, actually, it says 2015. It should be 2018, 17, and 16.
Okay.
We just had a little typo there. But this is the courses that have been approved since September, and then the total population of your courses.
Okay.
Okay?
Any questions?
Is she talking about polygraph examination statistics?
Continuing education, the next one.
Okay.
Yeah.
I have a quick question. How do you approve the continuing education providers?
The providers, The providers have an application they need to submit, so they'll submit this application, their business plan, how they would handle an instructor no-show, weather, whatever, and then their fee of $200.
So there's no emphasis on any of the material they'd be providing?
No, that would be with your course approval.
Okay.
So currently, a provider is an overarching provider. They can offer any type of course they want for any of the programs that need continuing education. But there is a course application that they would need to submit with the fee and the material and the time topic outline. And all this information is listed on the website.
Any other questions? Thank you very much.
All right, thanks.
Is she going to go to this other part about pass fail on the exam results, or is that not hers?
You have some questions on the exam result?
ma'am.
Sure.
Whenever we see, and it goes back to school curriculums and accreditation, when we're seeing people fail over particular parts of exams, and we have input with curriculum providers, because we recognize curriculums, is there ever a way to provide feedback back to schools that psychology or physiology or a particular topic is something that you're seeing, or is that more handled through the people who do the test?
That would be through the test. Rebecca, we'll get our exam expert up here for you.
Good morning, board members. My name is Rebecca Armas with Exam and Education. As far as the material, whether each individual, when they take their exam, they're going to give a strength and weakness report. If you wanted something, to that effect, that would be something that we could possibly look into as far as providing, but it's not anything that is out there for the individual schools to see. Like if you had a student at your school say, well, let's take a look. Let's look at your strength and weakness report, and let's look at each topic on this examination per the content outline that the subject matter experts have created. Once you go there, you can see kind of the trend. Okay, well, we'll see on this particular topic that you're scoring this out of this. Well, maybe we need to focus a little more attention there. But as far as like a database, we don't have that information handy.
It would just be useful, and that's one of the things I know that the APA is looking at with accreditation, is that we give a standardized exam, and where students are failing certain topics, and you see some pattern or trend that emerges, can you then go back to the school and say, hey, you're having a real problem with your people in psychology, and so, schools should always be in the practice of amending and improving curriculums as, thank you.
Ray Pizarro, Director for the Education Examination. I understand your comment and your concern, but you have to realize if you look at the stats, the numbers are low. And so you cannot really get some good statistical information about the performance of the exam when you have such low numbers of being offered. Now, we do something, as Rebecca was saying, for the cosmetology program, because it's so large. We have a methodology where you as a school can see the mean, the past mean as a state mean, and apply it from your school to that state mean, and you can see how your school is performing. But we're talking large number of exams being administered.
Yeah, no, I think we would agree that when you got 3 and 4,
Right.
you can't draw a pattern of that. But
Right.
if that were to emerge, is that something that you
Yes.
would be amenable to talking or educating the schools about, hey, you would work on this or work on this? Not the questions, but the overall topic where they're struggling.
We wouldn't tell the schools where they're struggling, but we would present that information on the website. It'll be available as we do it with cosmetology. Yes, we have the means to do it because we're capturing the information of what we need. The additional thing we would need to capture would be the students tied to the school. So we don't have that information when the student goes to PSI to test.
Okay.
See, with the other schools, since we regulate the schools in cosmetology, we know where all the students are coming from, and that information is provided to PSI, and they'll say, school A, these students tested, and this is how they perform.
Right.
We don't have that in this scenario, because
Okay.
we don't regulate the schools.
Have you seen a again, it's small numbers. Sharon Frank, sorry. Have you seen a pattern where there is a specific area in polygraph testing that is causing a problem for the majority of examinees?
We have not identified that, not even through exam development and during the exam development, right? Am I right on that? Yeah, we haven't, because again, the small numbers, but we do try to look at all of the items when we review those, and we ask ourselves, how many people of the universe who's testing are these folks getting these questions right or wrong? And it's not just right or wrong. You can get somebody who has passed the examination and they're getting, let's for example, question number 4 wrong, and they pass the exam, and everybody who's not passing the exam gets question number 4 right. So we say, okay, so what's going on? Why is that a problem for the people who are passing? Are the distractors not doing what it's supposed to be doing? Are the people who know the material are being fooled or not understanding what we're asking? So we have to go back and look at those questions and look at the distractors to see if indeed we're asking the right thing. So it's a constant fluid type of development when we look at the items and look at what we're asking. And of course, we always rely on the experts to be in that room to tell us what are we asking and are we asking the right thing for the examination that's present today.
Yeah, and I wanted to thank you for your, I know what work you do on the tests, and having seen other states' tests, Texas is probably well ahead of the curve in terms of quality of their examination. So
Yeah, I think we do have a solid exam.
you do. Thanks, Ray.
Any other follow-ups? No? Thank you so much. Moving to Agenda 5F, Compliance Division.
Good morning, Chair and board members. My name is Stephen Mills, and I've been asked to fill in today for Russ. Russ has a commitment that cannot be rescheduled, so I'm here to present your compliance report. And just a quick note about me, in case you're curious, I am the manager for the Medical and Health Professions section here at TDLR. In the last year and a half, we have brought on 15 medical and health professions programs to the agency. So I've been pretty busy. I understand that you have received a copy of the report in your packet. In terms of public outreach, Russ will be attending a conference in June, the Texas Association of Law Enforcement Polygraph Investigators. As always, he's been involved in fielding inquiries relating to the polygraph law and rules and various complex regulatory concerns that relate to your program. And lastly, if you're aware of any opportunities for public outreach at conferences or meetings, please let Russ know, and he'll get that on his schedule. It's a brief report for today. That concludes it. I'd be happy to take any questions you may have. I'll probably have to pass them along to Russ for the answers, but I'm happy to do so.
The American Polygraph Association's annual conference is here in Austin this year.
Okay.
I think it's late August. If you pass that along to Russ, I'm sure
I
the
will.
EPA will be giving him a formal invitation since it's in Austin.
Okay.
It should be easy if other members of the TDLR polygraph would like to attend. We can get them an invitation as well.
Great. Thank you very much.
And I just want to make a comment. I know that the polygraph industry, the professionals out there really appreciate when they see a representative from TDLR that shows up to their professional association. So thank Russ for that for me, please.
I'll definitely do that. TDLR across the board considers that to be a very important function.
No other questions. Thank you.
Thank you.
Moving on to item F6, Executive Office Report.
Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman and board members. I'm Nick Boenas, TDLR Chief of Staff, here to bring you an Executive Office report, kind of a summary of what is happening around the agency. Want to thank you for being here today, and thank you for your service to the industry and to the state of Texas. And again, congratulations, Mr. Tigan, for your service, and we'll miss you around here. 2017 was a busy year for the agency and a big year. As you know, we started it off with the 85th session of the Texas Legislature, and we followed that up with a special session during the summer. Since then, our staff's been busy implementing legislature that was passed during the last 2 sessions, and that includes everything from developing and reviewing rules to communicating with stakeholders, appointing and prepping advisory boards, hiring additional staff, and dealing with education exams, IT programs, and more. Majority of the work has been completed, but this is a process that will continue as we implement more programs over the next year or two. Last fall, our staff was busy doing what we could to help our licensees and small businesses along the Texas Gulf Coast recover from the devastation of Hurricane Harvey. We worked with the governor's office and Governor Abbott's Rebuild Texas efforts, and we were successful in implementing procedures to help all eligible licensees in the affected areas to help them recover and return to work as quickly as possible. Our Harvey focus now is on the rebuild by protecting small business and consumers, avoid unlicensed activity, and ensuring that they receive quality work for their hard-earned dollars. There's information on this and more on our website at tdlr.texas.gov and the governor's Rebuild Texas site. 2018 is a non-legislative year. Therefore, it's the time when we take on our statute-driven strategic planning exercise to improve the way we regulate our programs. And it's something that we take very seriously. 2 years ago, we identified 58 strategic initiatives to address during last year's legislative session. Proud to report that 56 of them were passed and signed into law. We'll be going through this important process again this spring, more specifically in the March-April timeframe, and you'll be hearing more about that here real soon. But I want to go back to our website for just a minute. We consider it our window to the world. It's our chief tool to communicate with our stakeholders and the public. And I wanted to share with you some recent web traffic numbers associated with this program. Over the last 6 months, the Polygraph Examiners website has had 5,552 page views. That's an average of about 33 a day. If you're wondering where the how the visitors are accessing your site, 54% of them are doing so from a desktop computer, while 43% have done it from a smartphone and 3% from a tablet. The top reasons for visiting your site, led by laws and rules, followed by exam information, polygraph examiner education, frequently asked questions, and then followed by forms. Also want to add that we are always looking at our websites, looking to improve them and keeping them fresh, innovative, as user-friendly as we possibly can. If you have any feedback on any of them, please pass them along our way. Also want to take a minute to promote our social media sites. We're on Facebook and Twitter, if you'd like to keep up with our activities and news there. We also have about 2,500 subscribers to our Polygraph Examiners email blasts, and they receive information ranging from education and exams to forms, meeting, events, and other notices. All this to provide transparency and openness for our stakeholders and the citizens of Texas. Thank you, and if you have any questions, be glad to answer them.
I'll add Tiffany Collier. Just real quickly, and this may not be your area, but the feedback I hear overwhelmingly is that we would like to be able to renew our licenses online. So just wanted to, I know this is brought up just about every time, but just, you know, trying to be the squeaky wheel here and hopefully get some grease on that one. So thank you.
You got it. Thank you.
Other questions? Thank you, sir. Moving on to item G, recommendations for agenda items for next committee meeting. Counselor, I'd ask for your guidance in this process. I'm new to the process, so I'll take a stab at it and feel free to help me out through the process.
Is this the work group item, Mr.
Yes.
Chairman, that you mentioned earlier?
Yes.
So we don't, this is Brad Bowman, General Counsel. We don't have an action item on to appoint work groups today. You can certainly put this item on your agenda for the next meeting and handle it that way. Is that, yes, sir?
I was under the impression at our last meeting we had an appointment for a work group, and there may have been some miscommunication between the chairman and myself to work on some issues that I thought was in the last meeting. And I thought that was approved to.
That you appointed work groups at your last meeting?
That was my understanding, so I was
Can-
going to
can
ask
you give
that
us
simply
just a-
that we, if it wasn't clear, that we simply bring that forward and have it included here.
Give me a minute to look at the minutes from the past meeting, if you would.
Should have probably included myself and Frank that was going to be on that work group.
It'll be in the 6th paragraph in the minutes.
Recommendations for agenda items. Committee decided to place the following items on the agenda. Okay. Is this a different work group that you're talking about, or is it the same? This is APA work group consisting of James O'Burke and Sharon Brank.
That's the one that I wanted to discuss, and then we continue that work group to consider evidence-based practices maybe that are inconsistent with the polygraph industry and our current statute. So I wanted to continue that or ensure that it was more formalized. And
Just as an item on your next agenda,
Yes, sir.
and that work group would report back
Correct.
to the full committee.
Yes, sir.
So there's no real, Mr. Chairman, as the chairman of the committee, you can designate that work group to work on that task and report back. There's not really a vote or action item that's necessary. I think as the chair of the committee, you can designate that work group to do that and report back to the full committee.
We will go ahead and designate that as a work group and have that included in the agenda item for the next meeting for discussion in public forum as far as the results of that work group's documenting what practices need to be standardized.
And the staff can work with you in between if you need staff support for that.
No, I don't think so. Counsel? Now, to add, today we talked about the penalty matrix that was discussed by the Enforcement Division, and we would like to establish a working group to review that penalty matrix and have it on the next agenda item. So for that, would I have to make a motion and have that discussed and voted on to have it presented in the next agenda?
To appoint a work group, you mean?
Yes.
At your next, you can do it that way, or we can just make note that needs to be on your next agenda. If you want to have a vote, that's fine, but I think we're listening and taking notes, and we'll can have that for you on your next meeting, on your next agenda.
So to have it on the next agenda, do we have to make a motion now, or are you taking the notes so that it can be added to the agenda for next time that we meet?
We'll add it to the agenda for your next meeting.
Okay. Any other recommendations for agenda items for the next meeting? I don't hear any. Can we move on to the next item? As far as the date and time for our next committee meeting,
Mr. Chairman, Nick
Yes.
Moenis again. There's no timeline on the rules for this board to meet in the future, so we can set the meeting date today, or you can hold off, and Christine can get with you shortly and or email and set up the board meeting. Your next meeting. It's up to you.
how much time do y'all need to work on as far as the work group? I'll be out of pocket until June. What is, we'll go ahead and make that determination at a later date. We'll be in touch with TDLR to advise when would be a good time to meet, looking at everybody's schedule.
Got it. Thank you, sir.
All right. This time, I call this meeting to come to a close. The time right now is 11:59. This meeting's adjourned.